What's up everyone? Now that we have different sections on our website, how about we create another one? And in this video, we're going to be creating contact form. You will be able to interact with it, but you won't be able to send the information anywhere since we don't know the tools to make it work. So let's jump into coding. All right, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to learn about how to create forms on the website. A bunch of different websites have a bunch of different forms such as sign in, login, contact form. And in our example, we're going to be using contact form. But for the contact form, we need a specific section on the website and how we can create one. Notice previously, in order to create section inside of the main content, we were using the article element. But form isn't an article, so which element can we use in that case? So for that, we will be using an element called section. So let's talk about the section element really quick. So you would use a section element whenever there is a more specific element to represent a particular section of the page, such as article element. And the way that you construct the section element is really similar to the article. So first thing you're going to do is create the heading. We're going to use the H2 similar to how we use it with article. And inside of the H2, we're going to put contact form, because that's going to be the contact form for our website. And since that's another section on our page, let's also include it in the navigation. So first thing, we're going to provide an ID for it, and we're going to give it a value of form. And we're going to scroll up, and over here we're going to create the link to that section of the page. So the href, remember, we need to specify the hashtag and the ID of that section. And then we're going to say contact form. Perfect. Let's refresh the page and test it out. All right, we have that contact form over here. Let's click. Perfect. Works as intended. All right, well now let's go ahead and start creating our form. Let's scroll all the way down, and the first thing that we're going to do is create the form element. So let's talk about that form element really quick. Well, the form element is the element that's actually going to represent our form, and it's going to contain all the input fields where the user will be able to input the information. And as you can see over here, VS Code auto-completed it with that attribute called action. There are also some extra attributes that you can add to it, such as method, and we're not going to be using them today because we don't really know how to handle form inputs, so let's just remove that and leave the form as is. So now that we have that form element, let's go ahead and create a couple of the input fields, and for that we will be using the input element. And the input element has attribute that we're going to be using called type. And there are a bunch of different input types that we're going to be using, and we're going to be exploring some of them today. And the first one is going to be text. So if you go ahead and save your file and refresh the browser, let's explore how that input type text looks like. And we can see that at the very bottom of the page, we have that empty box where we can actually type in. And notice we can only type in on one single line. So this is pretty much the very basic input element where the user can just type in some text on a single line. Let's talk about a couple other attributes that are going to be useful when you're playing around with those input elements. Another one is going to be called value. So let's take a look at that. Just type in some text over here, save it, and refresh the page. And notice now the contact form, or that input element, is actually pre-filled with some text inside of it. Right? And you can go ahead and delete it and type something else, and if you refresh the page once again, it's going to be pre-filled with the exact same value for that value attribute that you provided. So the value attribute is basically going to be the default value for that input element. So now let's go ahead and remove that value attribute, and we're going to play around with something else called placeholder. And for the placeholder, go ahead and type in once again some text, save the file, go back to the page and refresh it. Now notice we have some text inside of it, but this is not an actual value of the element. Whenever you start typing in, notice that some text actually disappears. So this is just a placeholder, and it's a bit blurry. I'm not sure if you can actually see that, but this is going to be the placeholder for that input element. This is not going to be its value, it's just some placeholder text. And usually on the website, you're going to see something like this. On the placeholder, they will use the email so that when user goes to the contact form or generally to the form, users know that they need to type in email in that input field. So now let's go ahead and explore another input element, and it's going to be with the type password. Go ahead and refresh the page. And notice two things. Now these two elements appear side by side, which means they are inline elements. And if we type something in the second one, notice we get those black dots. And this is something that you're used to seeing whenever you type in the password on the website. Let's go ahead and remove that input type password, as well as removing the placeholder with the email value. Instead, we're going to be using the label element to actually label our inputs. And let's take a look at that label element. So first thing, we're actually going to be removing that for attribute right now, and we're going to be placing our input inside of that label, as well as giving some text. And some text is going to be first name. Let's go ahead and save the file and refresh the page. And notice right now we have that first name column that's pointing to that input element. And whenever we click on that first name, we automatically focusing in on that input type text. So what labels do, they essentially associate that text with that input element when the input element is put inside of the label element. And it has two advantages. The first one is when you click on the first name, it focuses in on the input element. And the second one is a screen reader will read out the label when the user is focused on the form input. Another way of using label element is by using that for attribute as you've seen before. So let's talk about that. In order to use the for attribute, you need to provide the ID of the element that you're associating that label with. So in that case, we're going to create the ID for the input, and we're going to say input first name, and then we're going to go ahead and copy that ID and provide it to the for attribute, as well as moving that input outside of the label. So now if we go ahead and refresh the page, nothing is going to change, and now it is going to work the exact same way as it worked before. So notice if we click on the first name, it focuses in on that input element. Now let's also create an input field for the email. So I'm going to create a label as well as the input type, and instead of text, we're actually going to be using email. So let's take a look how it looks like in the browser. And it looks exactly like the regular input type text, with one exception. It will actually verify that the email that you're typing in is in the correct form. We'll see that later. So let's go ahead and give that input element an ID, and we're going to say ID email. We're also going to change it for the for attribute, as well as giving some content for that label. Looks good. Let's save it, refresh the page. Perfect. Now we got the first name as well as the email, and they work as intended. Also, let's get rid of the inconsistency over here. We're going to remove some spaces. And now another element that I want to introduce is also an input type, but now it's going to be input type submit. Let's go ahead and save it and refresh the page and see how it looks like. So basically the input type submit creates the button. And notice if we're going to type something in the email field and click submit, it will actually tell that please include that @ in the email address. So that's why the input type email is important when you use it for the email. Let's go ahead and introduce a couple other type options that we have. Another one is going to be called color. If we save and refresh the page, now we have that color picker and we can choose our favorite color. Perfect. Let's remove that one and introduce another one, which is going to be called number. Notice if we save and refresh, now we actually get a box that's really similar to the text box, but if we hover over it, it will actually give us those little arrows that are pretty hard to hit actually, but now you can actually select a number and it can range from negative to positives. Another useful one will be input with the type of file. Let's go ahead and see how it looks like. So now we can actually go ahead and choose the file, and it will give us that box, and we can select the file that we want to choose and submit that file in case we need one. Another two important types are going to be input with the type of checkbox. Let's go ahead and save it and see how it looks like. So it's basically a regular checkbox, and also we have that radio type. Let's go ahead and see how it looks like. Well, with that input type radio, we get that circle and we can click on it and select it, but we can't really deselect that. So how we can fix that? Well, usually you have multiple radio buttons on the website, so let's actually go ahead and create 2 of those. And the way that we can fix the issue, and by the way, let's save it right now and refresh the page and see how it performs. Notice right now we can actually check both of those, but let's fix that by giving it a name attribute. So right now we can just give it the name of BTN, and if we're going to go ahead and copy that below, whoops, save it, refresh the page, go back, and notice now you can actually select only one of those. So whenever you use the input type radio, make sure you give that a name attribute. Alright, let's clean up our contact form. We're actually going to get rid of that input types. And the last element I'm going to introduce is going to be called a text area element. So let's go ahead and see how it looks like. Save the page, refresh it, and notice right now you're getting that resizable text box where you can type on multiple lines and resize it just like that. So several options or several attributes that you can provide to the text area are going to be row and columns. So let's give some numbers to these attributes and see how it behaves. Let's go ahead and save it and refresh it, and notice right now how it is changing. So basically when you provide rows and columns, you provide how many rows are going to be in that text area and how many columns are going to be in there, but you can still go ahead and resize it. So you're pretty much providing the default size for that text area element. And notice the difference between the text area and input elements. Input elements are self-closing when the text area is not. So you can actually go ahead and type in some value over here, save it and refresh it, and this is how you can provide the default value for the text area element. So that's going to be it for that video. Go ahead and check out other input types that are going to be available to you, and in the next video we're going to learn about lists, divs, and spans. I'll catch you later.